Our Father, thank you for this morning. It's a bit of a chilly morning out there, and it's good to just to be getting up and getting moving and enjoying being in your creation, even on a cold winter's morning. We thank you for the blessings that you have given us. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the ability and the minds that you have given us so that we can dig into your word and start understanding what it is that you have laid down about yourself, about the world, and about us. And Lord, I pray that we would, as we approach the topic of worldviews and apologetics, Lord, I pray that we would be forever being transformed more and more into the image of your Son Jesus, so that we can, in this instance, look at the world through your eyes and through your lens. Lord, we admit that we come to the world with a particular set of lenses over our eyes, and we realise that, and so we just ask that you continue to transform us and continue to allow us to see things as you see them. And as we see things as you see them, Lord, I pray that will open our hearts to the world and a lost world around us, and also give us the tools to engage the world, a lost world around us. So we thank you for this time. We pray for your blessing on it. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, if you were here last week, we were walking through worldviews in terms of just the three main worldviews that we see in the Western world. We had managed to cover the Christian worldview. You'll remember that, and it is important just in terms of as we walk through, I guess, just what we might call modern history, that we realise that the Christian worldview, and the notes say, and its pre-modern cousins, that the Christian worldview was the predominant Western worldview up till, we might say, somewhere around the 17th century, 17th, 18th century, somewhere in that vicinity. And even if a person wasn't a believer, they understood and looked at the world through a Christian lens. They understood that there was a God. They understood that there was a fixed morality, and those sort of things that are inherent to the Christian worldview. And then came along the Enlightenment, and so we're going to pick that up on page 14, and I'll just again I'll try and use the notes sort of as a pattern to work through. We won't go through everything in the notes or anything like that. You can feel free to read those at home if you wish, but. The modern worldview then comes about as modern science starts to take birth and to take seed, and as mankind starts to realise that they are pretty smart. And in fact, they have figured things out, figured a lot of technology out. Obviously not digital technology, but certainly technology that then brought along the Industrial Revolution and those sorts of things, and they started to realise that realistically, from the modern man's point of view, that there was anything in the world, or anything was capable if we could put our minds to it and work through that. And so I think it's bolded in the second paragraph there under the modern worldview to those that are from the Enlightenment, and we'll talk about the Romantic thinkers as well. But there was a fundamental assumption there: truth is to be found through man's effort, not God's revelation. That was the shift in the modern with the modern worldview. Truth was to be found through man's effort, not God's revelation. And in fact, this modern worldview, if you're a fan of anything around Hollywood, this modern worldview still permeates through Hollywood. Man can achieve. We just have to get the right people in there, or the right technology. We can overcome anything, whether it's the big asteroids. You remember the Armageddon movie back in the 90s. We can overcome this massive asteroid that's going to destroy Earth because we've got rockets and nuclear weapons, etc. Star Trek was all about that. There was this still permeates through a lot of our culture. There's a handful of younger ones, but the Avengers series is all about that idea. We can do it through man's effort. And truth is also found through man's effort in understanding the scientifically what is going on around us rather than God's revelation. So we continue to look at human reasoning, and human reasoning was the basis of absolutely everything. So the Enlightenment was a movement there of I want to say primarily scientists, but it was through all of culture. And there was a lot of helpful things that came through it. There was a lot of helpful things in terms of just technology that rolled through this thinking, and the playing out of this kind of thinking. There's a number of people that are attributed to the Enlightenment ideas. It's near the bottom of page 14 there. So the thinkers there would John Locke, David Hume, Voltaire, if I'm pronouncing that right. Immanuel Kant was a big one. So he really started to push the idea and you'll recognise it still out in our culture today, that reason is the source of morality. We should think through things and rationally come to an agreement on morality, which of course feels like it's only a small step, and at the time, realistically, it was only a small step away from a Christian worldview, because a Christian worldview is rational, yeah. But it was the first step away, which allowed then multiple steps away. If reason is the source of morality, then all we have to do to suggest one sort of morality is to make up a good enough argument for it. Think about a pattern that has got us to where we stand in 2020. Just even think about the last century. I guess what you might say the sexual revolution in the mid 20th century gave even before that, the feminist movement, just slightly before the sexual revolution. So the feminist movement, which we might sort of ground somewhere around the 40s, 50s, 60s, somewhere in that vicinity. I mean, there was echoes before, but it really started to take movement there. That gave birth to the sexual revolution, and particularly there was a particular piece of technology that enabled that, which was... Sorry? Yes, particularly the pill, yeah, the oral contraceptive, yeah. So that gave birth to the sexual revolution there, which started to undermine the family, and then in the 1980s there was a big, massive axe swung at the traditional family, which was in the United States, in particular, which was no-fault divorce. Yeah, you could get a divorce really for no particular reason at all. If you wanted to get a divorce, you could get a divorce. That just started to chip or massively smash away at the family, and all the way along here there was rational reason for it. There was rational reason for the feminist movement, and in fact there were some good things that did actually come out of the feminist movement. There were some rational ideas for it, but those rational ideas then flowed into, well then if this feminist movement is correct, then the sexual revolution just makes sense. And if the sexual revolution makes sense, then why are we putting so much emphasis on family? Surely I should have a whole lot more autonomy in what I want to do, and actually these family structures, in particular marriage, is constraining my autonomy. And so there's rational arguments made for morality, and then of course once the family unit started to be crumbled, and we saw the effects of the crumbling of the family unit through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, then a broken family unit is the perfect place for the LGBT movement to come in, because it's not harming anybody. The harm's already been done by the family being broken down. We know that an LGBT kind of an environment will hurt the family, but that's already been done by the axe being swung at marriage by divorce. So therefore the LGBT movement is doing no harm. So why not? There's a rational, logical argument to it. And now then we get to the place in 2020 where we are, and it's got to the point where, in fact, if the LGBT movement is doing no harm, then it must be good, and anyone that says that it is not good is doing harm. And so that's where we sit today. Anyway, all that to say, reason then becomes the source of morality, and so morality can shift just by making some really good arguments, right? So we have the likes of Immanuel Kant to thank for that. He also mentioned that perpetual peace could be gained through universal democracy. That was just an interesting statement of his, an early thinker there for universal democracy, or some sort of one world government, if you might want to put it in those words. So that's the Enlightenment thinkers.
Praise Jesus, thank you, Lord Jesus.
Yeah, come and have a seat. Oh, thank you. So that was the Enlightenment thinkers. The Romantic thinkers were another group, and they while the Enlightenment thinkers threw heavily towards science, the Romantic thinkers threw heavily towards emotion. And I think it's on the top of page 15, the next page over. You can see that in the philosophy, and it is a philosophy of the likes of Roxette, Listen to Your Heart, Disney. Disney's all about that as well. You trust your inner heart, find your inner self. Obi-Wan Kenobi said, "Trust your feelings," and it was what's the other little dude? Yoda. Feelings you must trust. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that's really bad. But they were just saying that those little droplets were putting in all the way through our culture, through the modern era, but it's been keeping on going. Certainly that Romantic idea has been keeping on flowing through all the way through today. So we realise then that these worldviews, while they're generally aligned to a particular period of time, they have flow-on effects, and they keep on having influence even today. And so today we have, I guess, just a melting pot of worldviews. So, the modern worldview, how does it apply to evangelism in terms of how we might engage with someone who has a modern worldview that's still prevalent, although the modern worldview probably has dropped away to the side significantly now. So the modernist will again want to be grounding truth in probably hard physical science, or which gave birth to the postmodern worldview, in their feelings. Okay, the Romantic side of the modern worldview is their feelings. So what we can do then is start engaging with them at that point. We can, if someone that has a clear kind of enlightenment idea in their mind, we can start asking them where, so that truth that they claim that can be grounded in just knowledge and science. Where do they ground that? Where do they ground that science? How do they know what is right? How do they know what is wrong? How do they?
Pastor, I can't understand.
Oh, that's okay. We'll catch you a bit later there, Polly.
Yeah, I want to listen to the worship team.
Okay, that sounds good. So what where we can start engaging with them is just to start asking them, how do they even come to a point of evaluating science? So you can ask them the question, because if they were to do a scientific experiment, the basis of what they're going to evaluate there is looking at something, seeing the outcome, and making some sort of conclusions based on that. And the question you can ask is but how are you sure that the conclusion matches what you're seeing? And we can keep asking questions. The basis that they're going to have to come to is that what they are seeing, what they're flowing out, or what they're showing here is logical. How do you base? But how do you know that logic is correct? Well, it's just logical. right? So at some point they're going to drill down to some sort of circular reasoning. That logic is just logical. That science is just scientific. And of course we can engage there and we're helping them realise that they have some sort of circular reasoning. Now we have to stand back and say that actually, you know what? We have a circular reasoning as well. Because God exists. Why? Because he says. How do we know where he exists? Because he says he exists, which is a circular reasoning, right? So, however, our circular reasoning actually fleshes out to coherence, because a modernist with a pure naturalistic science kind of basis there has to keep on drilling and asking questions. You know, the matter that they've just used to do their scientific experiment, where did that come from? You know, they might drill back to the beginnings of the universe being a Big Bang. Where did the matter from the Big Bang come from, etc., etc. There's only so far that they can go back with a logical, rationalistic argument. They can ask the same question of us. Where did everything come from? God made it ex nihilo. God made it out of nothing. Where did God come from? Now you're making a categorical mistake in terms of a question. It's like, what does the smell of roses taste like? The question doesn't make sense. Where did God come from? The question doesn't make sense. What you are asking is, how did an uncreated being get created? So category mistakes, yeah? But a rational, logical answer to the question. The only answer to the question of how did everything get here is that there has to be an uncreated creator. It's the only logical answer. Can our minds wrap themselves around that answer? No. But it's the only logical answer to that. So we can engage with the modernist by just continuing to ask those questions, dig down to rational assumptions, and some point there. At some point in their assumptions, there is a disconnect. Their worldview does not stand up to coherent questioning. All right. So that was a modern worldview. Any thoughts, comments, questions around that?
I've got plenty of thoughts about it, but I'll just quickly say one.
Cool.
I realised I've given this modern worldview advice to my son.
Okay.
Follow your heart.
Follow your heart.
And the situation was this: first year at Auckland University, he did engineering, but he really wanted to study medicine.
Sure.
So he did the best he possibly could in engineering to get in medicine.
Yes. Yeah.
The pre-med course next year. So he talked to me and said, he did so well in engineering, he was offered a paid tutoring job the following year in engineering.
Yeah.
So he talked to me about it, and I said, follow your heart. So he's now fifth year medical student and loving it.
Loving it, yeah. So it's good.
So it's a difference for initially to like looking at things like careers, and than it is for belief systems, I think.
Yep.
And I worked for a principal, by far the best principal I've ever worked for, follows her heart, and she's brilliant, and she's built one of the finest schools in New Zealand by following her heart with staff appointments. I came to an interview expecting crowds of people to be there. It was just to sit down and informal chat. She'd already made up her mind.
Yeah. Interesting, hey?
Yeah.
So that's a great delineation, I think, to make. So what we're talking about primarily here is truth claims, yeah? And how do we orient truth? Because God has made us as emotional beings, and those emotions do play out into decisions. And there's an element of, if we were to tell our children to follow your heart in terms of to figure out what's right and wrong, so there's a massive area here that we'd be talking about in terms of worldview. So if we're telling them to, and even following your heart in terms of nuance that with God has placed desires in your heart, and those are we check those desires against the Bible, make sure that they are good and proper and biblical desires, and then pursue what God has the way that God has made us. And we might frame that and follow your heart. Yeah. Realistically, I think what you were saying was follow your heart, mind, and the way that God has wired you. which I think is that makes sense. But thanks, that's probably a really good helpful delineation there, and probably not exactly what Obi-Wan Kenobi or Roxette or Disney actually end up digging into. They are more find out what is right and true for you. And that's what they're
doing spiritual gifts, which is what we have to learn.
Yes, yeah,
To some degree.
Yeah. In terms of gifting for the church, absolutely. We do follow the way that God has made us and created us, and that outworks with the way that our heart, turns to various things, doesn't it? Cool. All right. Thanks for that clarification. That's helpful. Let's move through to the postmodern worldview, and that is essentially approximately where we find ourselves in our in 2020. So postmodernism, essentially, if modernism took a step away from God and the fact that it tried to find truth in reason and science rather than from God and revelation, so the postmodern idea just takes another leap again and undercuts any firm basis for understanding God, man, morality, or history, right and wrong, the whole works. So I remember sitting in a class at Waikato University. It was the early 2000s, and our lecturer just said we were talking through a bunch of things around what I didn't realise at the time, but it was postmodernism. He was teaching postmodernism essentially, and then he made this statement: so you can see then there are no absolute rights and wrongs. Okay, there is no absolute right and wrong. And I just I thought I shouldn't say it. I put my hand up. Sir, is that statement that you made there, was that an absolutely right statement? It's like, I don't know how he dodged the question. He dodged the question really, really well.
He probably had it every time.
Possibly he had. But of course you can see the absolute absurdity in the statement, that there is no absolute right and wrongs. Well, either he's right there or he's wrong there. And if he's right, he's proved his statement wrong. If he's anyway. So the postmodern modern idea, though, it is through our culture right now massively. It is allowing all the things that we're seeing through the United States. The United States just seems to be a massive melting pot for ideas and clashes on worldviews right at the moment. It's kind of a little scary to see what's happening there. But the ideas that postmodernism brings about is the idea of, well, your Christianity is okay for you, but don't try and force it on me. It also has the idea of you can't claim to have one true source of truth, essentially. I think the notes put it, you can't claim to know who God is. We can't know anything for sure. There you go. Saying that Jesus is the only way to God makes you as intolerant as the worst racist. Okay, so there's the Enlightenment. There's the postmodern worldview coming through. And because they would say that there's no absolute way to, or no way to know absolute truth. You can't have a corner. We can't, as Christians, can't have a corner on what's true and what's right. So therefore, your truth is good for you, and your truth is good, and my truth is good for me. Of course, it comes crashing down when they come to the idea of like a court of law, when you can't have two versions of truth. You can't have two versions of right or wrong. There has to be a right, there has to be a wrong. I think I mentioned last week that a postmodernist will claim till he's blue in the face that there is no absolute right or wrong. But you punch him in the nose and he thinks that's wrong. He really does. So, then postmodernism essentially has to end up being functionally atheistic. It just kind of has to. A postmodern, someone who believes in or holds a postmodern worldview, they can profess a belief in God, and they can profess a belief in the supernatural, but there is no way that God or that supernatural can be 100% authoritative on their lives. So essentially they're making some sort of other idea of God, certainly not a Christian idea and a biblical idea of who God is, because that God cannot have a authoritative influence over their life, because if there is an authoritative influence, there has to be an authoritative influence over everyone's life. And of course, my truth is good for me and your truth is good for you, and we all live together happily like that somehow, which of course absolutely can't. Interesting that the postmodern, so the postmodernists, which has flourished into the LGBT community there. The postmodernists will say that your truth is good for you and my truth is good for me, except when your truth actually cuts across my rights. And then we've got a problem. Now your truth is intolerance. I'm not going to be tolerant of your truth because I'm going to label your truth as intolerance. So again, and I think we can, hopefully we can reasonably quickly see the incoherence of a postmodern worldview. It just doesn't fit together. I think then, how do we engage with a postmodern worldview? I think it's really helpful to enable someone that holds a postmodern worldview to understand the implications of their worldview. I sat with a group of year 13 students a couple of years ago, and they had they just invited a handful of people in from the community just to talk about leadership and what their take on leadership means in the community, because these guys were either I think it might have been entering year 13, must have been at the beginning of the year, so they were obviously going to be leaders throughout the year there. And I encouraged them to think about, we didn't have the opportunity to be explicitly Christian, but I encouraged them to think about the ideas of what is right and what is wrong. Because as leaders, you have to stand up for what is right and stand against what is wrong. And then I encouraged them to actually just to challenge perhaps the thinking that is around them that right and wrong are these very blurry kind of ideas. I didn't use the LGBT example explicitly, but I asked them to think about something that their grandparents or great-grandparents in their culture would have said was, they would have just understood explicitly that something from their culture that would have been wrong and today our culture says is right and it's okay. And I think they were all probably getting at what I was talking about. Certainly the LGBT movement is that culture says it's right today. Pretty much universally, their grandparents or great-grandparents would have said that was wrong. Okay, great. So let's just tuck that in the back of your mind. Now I want you to think about something that you today know is absolutely abhorrent. Think about something like pedophilia. Absolutely, completely abhorrent. Now, we all agree that that's totally wrong, right? Yeah, absolutely. Roll the clock forward to your grandkids or great-grandkids. What if their culture says that pedophilia is okay and it should be an accepted part of practice? Now, who's right? Was it your grandparents, or your grandparents or great-grandparents? Is it us today, or is it those guys in the future? Weird. There's the postmodern worldview, right? Because the postmodern worldview would say that our culture is right and our culture is, we're understanding things correctly, we're enlightened, etc., etc. Our great-grandparents, they were all, stick in the muds or whatever you want to call them. But then roll that thinking forward, another generation or two generations or however, and that's a frightening idea. The postmodern thinking essentially has to say that the dominant ideas of the culture today is what is right. Yeah, it is what is morally right and what is morally acceptable. That's essentially where they have to land. Although they'll certainly argue that that there's your truth and my truth, etc., etc. But even those ideas, so then we can challenge them and say, so what you're saying is that Nazi Germany was okay because the dominant feeling in Nazi Germany, especially explicitly in the leadership, but that permeated through much of the culture, was that it was okay to go and exterminate the Jews. And even if they push back a little bit, but then hold on, their truth is okay for them and your truth is okay for you, right? That's the logical outworkings of postmodernism. So I think we can engage postmoderns just by realizing that, or helping them understand the implications of their worldview. They have to say that some of those, they have to approve of some of those things, and if they don't approve of some of those things, then they've just cut their own worldview down. All right, so that's a quick going through of a handful of, the modern worldview and postmodern worldview. Any thoughts, questions, comments around that? Given that our time, we'll dip into theology and metaphysics just for a little bit. Cool. We'll keep moving. All right. Metaphysics. Anyone come across the word metaphysics before? Anyone want to give us a little bit of an idea of a definition of metaphysics? Any thoughts? Metaphysics is essentially the study of reality. Okay? And I'm just actually trying to see where if a good definition of metaphysics has been written. I think we'll use down the bottom. Yeah, right down the bottom of page 16. It's characterized as the philosophical study of the nature of being or reality and the ultimate categories or kinds of things that are real. Over the page, R.C. Sproul writes, it goes beyond the physical realm that we can see and measure. Thus, metaphysics is a philosophical attempt to bring sense and coherence out of all the incongruous elements of the world. I think we're actually just walking through it will just help us to understand a little bit more about what metaphysics is about. So the first, the heart of the question is, in terms of metaphysics or reality, is how does God relate to reality? Okay. Who is God in this? Because God essentially has to be either the starting point of our reality, or he has no relation to our. If there is no God, then he has no relation to our reality. So the illustration on page 17 there of the two boxes, I think, is helpful. Open or closed reality. The answer to that can be illustrated in those two boxes. Either there is a supernatural on the right, and so that you would say that's an open natural order. So what we have is our world around us, and our world basically, by and large, works according to natural principles, right? Scientific principles. If I was to drop this, gravity would take its effect, and it would fall to the ground, right? So it's a scientific principle, and the world works around that. But an open natural order understands that there is also a supernatural, i.e., primarily God, and then the other supernatural beings that he has created, angelic beings essentially, and they do have some influence on the natural order and can come in and interact with the natural order. So the massive example that we see of that is in Genesis 1, when God created the natural order. So he came in and he stepped in a supernatural way, but had an impact on the natural order. As you look through the Bible, you see the world continuing to turn as it normally does, and then God interacting in a miraculous way. So we have the natural order, but God interacts and supernaturally intervenes. That's called an open natural system, or an open system of open natural order there. Then on the left, The alternative to that, of course, is no supernatural order. So in our 21st century scientific community would hold to a closed natural order. So the world is what it is. It has its laws, gravity works, etc., etc. The sun comes up in the morning, but there is no supernatural elements that interact with that. All right, so, sorry.
Can I throw something in? Gravity only takes effect if there's not another order that stops it, right?
Sure.
So gravity is not taking effect on that bottle because there is another order. If you stuck it on top of in a boat, it wouldn't drop to the bottom of the ocean because it's sitting in something. So there's always another order in which can be over. And so in the same way, God or spiritual being is just bringing another order in. So in theory, all of it's supernatural from that aspect.
Yeah.
Because there's always just another layer in which there's another law taking effect over a law of gravity or a law of the world turning.
That's right.
Someone's just interrupted that or another.
Yes, came and interacted with that and placed a higher, more powerful order.
Higher, more powerful
order. Yeah, when God comes and interacts. Yeah, it's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah. Thanks. That is good. And of course, Colossians 1 tells us that, in fact, that even just in the normal ordering of the universe, in terms of the world spinning, and that it is Christ himself who holds that in his hand, and he is keeping all things happening in the universe, right? So grab your Bibles if you want. Let's just check out exactly what Paul says there, because I was making a butchery of the verse there. Colossians chapter 1. And it'll be after verse 15. Verse 15 is his start, where he sort of starts to take a turn and just look at who Christ is. Verse 17. Yeah, thanks. So verse 16 tells us that Christ was the one who created, which is interesting. Often we just think about God the Father as the creator. I think it's good to think about God the Father as the architect, perhaps, and Christ as the one who executes the plans. So for by him all things were created. Remember that we are talking about Christ because it's saying he is the image of the invisible God back in verse 15. But verse 16, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Which blows our mind when we think about Jesus as a baby in the manger, right? It's baby in the manger, and in him all things were holding together. How that exactly works, we won't know until we get to heaven. But so even when we think about just the normal day-to-day life, and we don't see a particular miracle as such happening, there is a supernatural element to that, still holding everything in order. All right. So then we start. What we'll do next week is we're going to start to have a little look at this idea of how we understand reality and how it interacts then with the Christian worldview, then the modern worldview, and then the postmodern worldview. So we want to just, what that'll do is just help us dig into those worldviews just a little bit deeper and make sure we have a good understanding of them.